All right, so I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aidan Mahoney. I am a student at Cornell University, and I'm also a student member on the AMS Board for Operational Government Meteorologists. The Board for Operational Government Meteorologists is dedicated to serving operational meteorologists at all levels of government, including the federal level, the military level, state, and local levels. While fully committed to support AMS efforts to bring together and foster public-private partnership activities in the provision of weather and climate services, our focus is on government meteorologists. We are here to represent your concerns to the AMS and also to advocate for your interests. If you are curious to learn more about the board, you could check us out on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, as well as our website on the AMS website if you Google AMS Board for Operational Government Meteorologists. So today's webinar is on the topic of mental health and operational meteorology, a very important topic to all of us, even those of us considering careers with the government in any way, shape, or form. And this is going to be the first in a series of webinars on this important topic, and we look forward to bringing together as many different people and perspectives as we can in order to, again, talk about this important subject. So with that, I will pass it over to, I would like to welcome my fellow student member, Lexi Elizadel, as well as our other panelists. So Lexi, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, I can start us off. So my name is Lexi Elizalde. I am a student at South Dakota Mines. I joined the board not too long ago. And yeah, I'm just here to help offer a student perspective, especially someone who wants to go into operational meteorology. And I'm also here to help represent some of the students that can't make it today and have some questions for Valarie and Kellen and even you, Aidan. So thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, with that, I'll pass it over to Lieutenant Commander Valarie Gardner.
So Aidan, I would like to save my introduction after Lieutenant Commander Jones. I think because I'm the first to speak, so I'll save mine until after he introduces himself, if that's okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Yeah, hi, my name's Lieutenant Commander Kellen Jones. I'm a Navy Meteorology and Oceanography officer. I've been in the Navy for about 12 years, started my career as a what we call a surface warfare officer, so serving on a ship. Did that for 2 years out in Japan, and then I transitioned to be a meteorologist. I worked, then went to Fleet Weather Center San Diego to serve as a operational forecaster. Then I went into a policy role at Stennis Space Center, which is our headquarters. And then I spent 5.5 years getting a master's and Ph.D. In meteorology and oceanography. And now I'm the operations officer at Fleet Weather Center San Diego, which is one of two of the Navy's forecast centers for the globe. We forecast for the Pacific and Indian Oceans, about 2/3 of the globe. And I think this is a great opportunity to have a good conversation. The Navy is taking steps to take mental health much more seriously. And I think in our role as forecasters and meteorologists, there's a unique perspective for that on operational watch floors. So I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
So yeah, so I think we'll pass it over to Lieutenant Commander Gardner.
Hi, everyone. As Aidan said, I'm Lieutenant Commander Valarie Gardner, and I'm a United States Public Health Officer, and I'm embedded now with NOAA National Weather Service. I've been with Weather Service for just over a year now. September 1 of last year, I joined Weather Service. So in the midst of COVID, so I really have been meeting people virtually. I've started getting out in the field. I've gone to 2 field offices now, weather forecasting offices now. So I'm really looking forward to meeting more of those who are at weather service soon in the future. I am a licensed clinical social worker, a master addiction counselor as well. I have over 25 years of clinical experience and almost 12 years of active duty time with United States Public Health Service. And so quite interesting. So I think it's okay for me to go ahead and keep talking,
Yeah,
Aiden. I
absolutely.
just wanted to make sure. And so, as Commander Jones alluded to, Weather Service, like many others, have recognized that mental health is a key component of our lives. And so now you hear me say behavioral health. I'm a behavioral health officer because we've learned that we often, or in the past, we looked at mental health differently than how we look at any other aspect of our lives. But we can't silo, we can't treat it as something different. If one area of our life is out of, I'm going to say out of whack, but out of control or is out of sync, then another part will then suffer. So we can't separate our physical from our mental, or neither should we look at it any differently. And so I know that there's been a huge stigma attached to mental health, but I'm really happy. I think, COVID has brought many challenges for us, and we've struggled through COVID for multiple reasons that I'll highlight some of the stats that we've seen from COVID. But one thing that it has done, I think, favorably done for us is highlighted the real importance of mental health care and treatment. Weather Service took note. They know, and I have to say, I hope some of my fellow Weather Service meteorologists in other professions are here, but I have to say they're some of the hardest working men and women I've ever met. When I came on to Weather Service, I wasn't sure if I would be fully utilized. I'm like, I'm not sure what they might need or do with me, but I was enlightened, and educated. I underestimated the toll and impact that the demands and responsibilities that they carry. And so prior to me coming on, I must say the Learning Center, a lot of people within Weather Service took note of the physical and mental toll that the job brings and the demands that are faced being a meteorologist. And they started working on critical incident stress management, and that was one of the reasons they wanted a behavioral health officer, because of my work with army and other military treatment facilities. They selected me to help enhance not only the critical incident stress, but I've been able to provide clinical support to our meteorologists as they face severe weather events and other life crises. So I've said a mouthful. I want to make sure there's no questions about my role or anyone else's role here before I continue on. Aiden, were there any questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and you brought it up. So just if anyone has any questions at any time, please feel free to ask them in the chat. You could also direct message any of the co-hosts if you are maybe not comfortable sharing your chat with everyone. I just want that to be made clear. So we welcome all questions.
Thank you for that, Aiden. And so I just wanted to just share a few statistics with you, a few mental health stats from the past year. And so the current trends that I'm seeing, one in every five Americans adults will experience some type of mental health crisis. And so a lot of us think, I'm going to say, I hope in the past we felt like if we have um, depression or anxiety, or if we're struggling with some type of mental health disorder, that there must be something wrong with me. But as I just said, not only can job demands, life stressors, other unexpected life events can throw anyone off balance. And we're seeing that through COVID. mental health numbers increased over 11 to 18% for most adults. So the current trends are 37 to 41% of most adults are struggling with one form or another of mental health issues. And I know this is a college event, so our primary attendees audience might be college age students. I want you to know that the biggest impact, or those who have reported suffering the most through COVID, are those 18 to 27 to 29, depending on what resources that you look at. But according to CDC, and Kaiser Permanente and some other ones, you are the ones that are most impacted by the COVID pandemic. And so another alarming trend that I want to highlight, and especially, I know there were some questions that were submitted from the meteorology world, but the workplace, I think now more and more employees are starting to recognize we have to make sure that there are resources available and that we support our team members. Healthy team members represent healthy organizations. And so when I was doing some research, I came across a troubling trend. 80% of those struggling with mental health conditions or issues in the past would not seek help because of the stigma associated with mental health, or acknowledging that you have a mental health issue. In EAPs, so employee assistance programs, were underutilized. 4.5% was the highest utilization rate that was being reported across the United States. I'm happy to say within the Weather Service, I think just by bringing on a person solely dedicated to helping and supporting not only behavioral health but wellness and culture for Weather Service, but it normalized and validated that, hey, it's okay for you to reach out and say you need help and get that help. I think, um, you know, again, I encourage people, if I always say, if I had a broken limb, I wouldn't try to reset that limb on my own. I wouldn't walk around struggling with the pain of the broken arm. And neither should we with the pain of mental health conditions either. You shouldn't try to deal with it on your own. There's resources, there's people like myself that's available to support you through whatever struggles you might face. And so, just a lot of you, I saw some of the questions, and I'm going to give you a few the other panelists opportunity to talk. I'm sorry, I can go as long as I need to, but I learned a lot about. And I'm still learning. I don't know everything, but the demands that you face as a meteorologist, as vast. Commander Jones talked about, half of of the world. They're monitoring weather for half of the world. That's not an easy job. Weather is, although there's a science and you've studied to it, it's still unpredictable. And then what I also have learned, not only are you monitoring weather, providing reports, trying to keep people safe, you're doing that for communities that you are connected to. And so having to deal with the aftermath of a tornado, fire, hurricane, and we've seen significant weather shifts and trends, so we know that it's more prevalent than not. And what I admire the most, these people are monitoring weather, and when some people can retreat or go for safety, they do not leave their posts. They're committed to making sure they give the best report as possible or the best weather to keep those safe in their communities. And then when there are disasters or significant impact of severe weather, they then have to deal with the aftermath of seeing their community recover from the aftermath. That's a lot to carry on a shoulder, on shoulders, and because of the passion and dedication that they bring to their jobs, many of them they've pushed through, and they do it at all at cost to their personal well-being. They will not tap out. They're going to make sure that they support the mission, and unfortunately sometimes at personal cost. So I'm happy that Weather Service brought me on. I'm hoping this is the future for other federal agencies that in private agencies that are not used to having a dedicated behavioral health person or resources available, because again, you can't do this work and not have it impact you in one form or another. So I'll take a pause and allow others to speak and to ask questions.
So I did see one question in the chat from Darren Clabo for Lieutenant Gardner. Are you the first person to serve in this position with the Weather Service?
I am. I'm the first behavioral health officer with Weather Service, and I don't think I'll be the last.
Yeah, I think it's a really great model because the Navy is actually considering, they're discussing right now a similar strategy. So we had a discussion last week about potentially embedding social workers or therapists within individual commands and trying to think through logistics of how do we pay for that? What would that look like? And I think it's a sign that the Navy is trying to take this much more seriously. And we have, especially in the Navy, we have a very rigorous physical fitness program and professional development and academic and training and certifications. And we don't really have a program or a kind of dedicated preventative care for mental health. We can go access services if we need them. And so I think the Navy now is trying to rethink how do we, best support the workforce. And one of the initiatives is potentially embed, just like you're doing at the Weather Service, embed mental health directly into the commands. And one of the reasons why that's really important is a lot of what we do is classified. And unfortunately, it makes it really difficult to have open conversations with providers when you want to talk about really what you're going through, but you can't. And so one of the ideas is to bring in mental health professionals that will have security clearances so that you can talk about everything. And so I think that's a really great initiative. We face, especially, we have the struggles that we face as an operational, weather support, but also just deploying to sea. Because for us, we deploy weather forecasters out to sea on ships. And so they have the struggles of the watch rotation as being a forecaster, but also, deployments. So you're talking 7 to 9 month deployments away from family. And the rigors of ship life, which is it's a lot of fun, but it's also very long hours, minimal time off, a very monotonous schedule. The watches are 12 on, 12 off. So it gets really grueling. It's very similar to what you'd experience as a forecaster on a watch floor. It's just you don't get to go home every night. And that adds a whole nother layer of challenge for mental health. And we can talk more about that. Maybe we can get into some other questions.
Are there other questions, Aidan? Because no.
We do have something from Gordon Brooks. He's asked, he wanted to ask about one of the statistics you mentioned, an 11 to 18% increase of what during COVID in the past year?
Oh, my apologies. Increase in mental health conditions such as depression and anxiety. So if you compare from April of 2021 to April of 2021 to February of this year, to the prior year, 2019, that's where that increase is taken from. Increased reports of depression, anxiety. For substance abuse, I think it was 24%, and that's taken from CDC. And for suicidal ideations, it increased by 11%. Suicides, 3%. And so I just, until we get through the other questions, I just wanted to say, in response to Commander Jones, I think NOAA has recognized, I was the second behavioral health officer within NOAA, the first with Weather Service. So we did have a behavioral health officer embedded with Ocean and Marine Services, our OMAO office, who was also available to provide support to the NOAA Corps officers who are on ships. And then I came on board, and as a result of my position, most line offices now within NOAA have gotten their own public health behavioral health officer, or are in the process of working on bringing on their own embedded behavioral health officer. So we're definitely, pretty soon, most line offices within NOAA will have their own embedded behavioral health officer. So I'm hoping we're setting a trend and can help our sister agencies or others learn how to navigate and how to do that.
Well, I'd like to jump in and ask and read one of the submitted questions, and maybe we can roll with that.
Okay.
There's a question, do you have any advice for overcoming mistakes or perceived failures on the job, such as an inaccurate forecast or missed warning? I think that's a really good question to talk about, because there's a lot of pressure as a meteorologist. Typically the services you're providing can mean the difference between life and death in some cases. But also, just even without that, just offering decision makers the right information to make the best decisions. But I think it's important to take a step back and realize, and this kind of ties into the imposter syndrome question. We are going to make mistakes. We are human, and it's important to kind of put things into perspective. We receive a lot of training and education, but that doesn't account for the human element, or the element of chaos. So I think it's important to realize that we will make mistakes, and that the best response to that is to learn. So I think framing mistakes as an opportunity to learn is, I think, the right way to look at mistakes. Obviously, everybody is going to do their best, and so it's not really a matter of negligence or intentionally making mistake. But I think it's changing the frame, how you look at the problem, and focusing more on how can you learn from this, how can you teach others, and how can we make what we do better, or our agency better, and not focus so much that it's a personal failure, because that does happen to a lot of people, and it can really affect their future and their career, to take things extremely personally. I mean, in some ways it's good, because it's a good motivator. I made a mistake. I need to work harder. I need to make sure, I'm on top of the science. But there's a point where you have to realize that it's about learning. It's not about being perfect, because that's just not going to happen. Does anybody else have any comments on that?
I agree. I don't want to consume all the time, but I agree with everything that you said, Commander. You are human and you're not perfect. And I think always, when you ask or you go back and you review your choices and your decisions, I think that shows a connected heart, and the passion for your job to get it right. But you have to, like Commander Jones said, the reality of your job, you're not going to get everything 100% correct, because it's impossible. We talk about imposter syndrome. It's okay. I think that's one thing I see within the Weather Service. There's mentors, there's training. No one expects you to have all the answers. And so as you grow, you get better at your game. But then, we rehearse. We kind of I tell everyone, we're harder on ourselves than anyone else could ever be. And would you kick a good man when he's down? No, but that's what we do to ourselves. And so if you find that that's a pattern of behavior, as much as you rehearse the negative, you have to start rehearsing the positive. What did you do well? What do you do well? And then acknowledge you wanting to get it right again just shows that, again, a connected heart and the dedication and compassion that you bring to the table. And so so someone asked, I really don't understand the term imposter. And I'm going to come back to Darren. I see your question too, Darren. But the imposter syndrome, despite hearing it rather often the past few months. So I'm going to try to simplify it for you. In spite of your professional knowledge and skills that you bring to the table, you are always second guessing yourself or not confident in what you do bring to the table. So there's a lot of emotional turmoil and conflict about what you are capable of versus what you're not capable of. So I don't know if anyone else want to chime in and do a better job
Yeah, I
at
think
it.
I'd like to chime in on that because I think it happens a lot in the military. And I think for me, I experienced this a lot. I would say still now, but I think especially a few years ago. But I think it's, doubting that you have the qualities and capabilities and training to do your job. So, the Navy invests a ton. I mean, the Navy's paid for 10 and a half years of education for me. And I still feel like I'm not qualified sometimes to do my job. Not that I don't have the skills I need, but more so just doubting myself. I'm not experienced enough. I don't have enough training. I'm not old enough to be in the, to have the responsibility that I have. And I think everybody experiences that at some point. But then you also have to look at it and go, yeah, but I think everybody feels like that, right? So it's kind of like, I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but a lot of it is finding the confidence within yourself to overcome some of those doubts. That, obviously you are qualified, you are educated, you are in that position because you are the best person for that, the best person for that job. But that takes a little bit sometimes to kind of work through self-doubt. And I think, I'm pretty sure everybody feels like that at some point.
Yes, and I agree, and I think sometimes wearing a uniform is makes it even harder because we we are although we're all rated whether we're a civilian or not, but we tend to have to compete when we're in uniform to show that we're the best of the best, so to make the next rank. So that can be very challenging and difficult place to sit. So, but I agree. We have to nurture ourselves, and we can't wait for external sources all the time because sometimes the world is not going to validate us. So if we don't practice self-validation, where do we sit with hurt, disappointment, and as Commander Jones said, self-doubt? And that's a painful place to be on a daily basis. So let me go back to Darren's question and let me scroll back up. So Darren said, being a meteorologist is stressful. At what point does stress become something more serious? And, it kind of alludes back to someone said that when you're teleworking, now that we're teleworking, work is in our home environment, so there's no separation. And so when you start having, I've been trying to educate within weather service, when you start having, usually there's a physiological as well as a psychological shift that happens when you're burnout or overstress. And there's clear signs and symptoms from a physical as well as psychological, that it is heading to the danger zone. So if you start having lots of aches and pains, medical conditions that are not related to heredity or lifestyle, if you find your mood is hard to regulate it, you're constantly irritable or angry and or apathetic, you find yourself saying I don't care anymore, all of those things, there's emotional, behavioral, if you start doing unhealthy behaviors to cope. So if you are drinking more, eating more, not sleeping, gaming, turning to work all hours of the day when instead of taking care of yourself, those are signs, warning Will Roberts, I'm sorry, Robertson, I'm trying to get it out, that you're in the danger zone for overstress and or burnout. And as we know, the World Health has now acknowledge burnout as a syndrome as well. And so I found coming into weather service, a lot of the staff was burnout before COVID. COVID just compounded things because of the demands of the job. It can lead to burnout. And because of that guilt that you carry, the compassion, there was a great article last summer when compassion leads to burnout. You don't give yourself permission or time to rest or take care of yourself. That's what it turns into, overload and burnout. So if you have, I didn't go over all of those symptoms, but like I said, muscle aches and pains, hair loss, irritable bowel, so digestive or gastro issues, high blood pressure, diabetes, all of those things can be induced by stress, heart issues, if if you weren't having problems with them before. And again, if you find it hard to regulate your mood, that's another psychological sign that you might be dealing with burnout or stress overload.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add on to that and maybe directly answer the question with a personal experience, and then also relate it to another question. I got a direct message. I'll get to that. But so when the first time I was on a watch floor, this is after I left the ship, we are doing 12 on, 12 off, and it's 2 weeks of nights, 2 weeks of days. And it's just doing that for just nonstop. And for me, I have a history of anxiety and ADHD. So for me, those are challenges that I already have. But I realized for me, the burnout manifested very physically. So there was a time where I just couldn't catch my breath. So even just sitting at a computer, I just felt always out of breath. And I went and sought help at therapy, and they sent me to see a doctor. And it turned out my blood pressure was like 190 over 110, just from not sleeping enough. And I learned some breathing techniques, and I took up meditation, which is something that I took up pretty seriously as a way to help regulate my mood and to help regulate my blood pressure. And that was really effective for me. But this was 8 years ago. And it was actually it was a challenge to seek help in that moment, even for something pretty, not benign, but something that it really wasn't super serious. It wasn't something very acute. And so Christine Mahoney asked the question, how will active duty military be encouraged to seek, let me scroll up, behavioral health services? So it's a lot better than it used to be. Even as recent as 8 years ago, it was very difficult to seek help out of shame, out of doubting yourself, but also out of security. So, for us, when we seek behavioral health, depending on what it is, we have to report that back because it can affect our security clearance. So there's a huge stigma, and maybe not even just personally, I needed help, but also, if I seek help, what's going to happen to my security clearance? And for a long time, that was something that held a lot of people back. And in some cases, security clearances were affected because if it was a serious condition, security clearances had to be taken away because you're handling sensitive stuff. But it also just prevented people who just needed to talk to someone. It really hurts, feeling encouraged that you can go ask for help. And, I think in that case, I did it anyways, and it was fine. But today it's a lot better. For us, there's so many more services that are available. There's as far as just providers, but also it's really just the climate and culture within the command and in the Navy of just being a lot more open to just talking. And so, we have regular training every year and about, suicide-related behavior and, stress control, and the Navy's getting better. And it really starts just being able to talk about it freely. And that's a change I've noticed in the past, maybe 5 years, is just how much more people talk about it. Because when people talk about it, it doesn't seem so, so weird to you that, hey, maybe I should go ask somebody for help. but there's still a long way to go. And as I said, I think a huge improvement will be being able to access help directly in the command without having to leave the lifelines of the command, where you can feel more comfortable because you're around friends. And one of the things kind of tying in what Gordon talked about, teleworking, that's actually the fact that we couldn't telework. So at our forecast center, some people telework, but the watch floor can't telework because what we do is classified. We had to be there in person. And during COVID, we did very well. We had very strict protocols, but that was actually something that helped people through COVID, was being able to come to work every day around their friends and their colleagues and the camaraderie of that. So that, I think, actually helped us, although there were still a lot of challenges. But I hope that answers everyone's question, or at least the 3 questions that I tried to touch on. Yeah, any comments from anybody else?
I can say things are getting better. I know I shared earlier, I had just left Fort Benning and had been part of the Army environment for some time, and they've shifted how you can now self-report for substance use, and I think that's a sign that, hey, by making it restricted reporting or mandated reporting, there are a lot of people who are not getting help. Now you can come for treatment, like Commander Jones said, and just talk, and you will. We let you know it doesn't impact your career if it's serious. And even what people don't realize, even for security clearance, if there's if you've had like a hospitalization or serious mental health treatment, they asked about progress. They ask about prognosis. So it doesn't necessarily mean that because you seek treatment, your security clearance is going to be revoked or you're not going to be able to maintain that. So the world is adjusting and learning. And so I think by people like us having these conversations, by us setting the example in seeking help and telling our colleagues or encouraging colleagues to seek help, we can impact that trend and the stigma in a more impact or a greater way in the future. Someone asked, what advice would you give to students preparing for operational meteorology positions? I'm going to let Commander Jones speak first, and then I want to talk about that a little bit as well, because he's living the life.
So, okay, so I guess I'm probably not the right person because I came into this community a little convoluted. In my undergrad years, I didn't do very well my first year in college, and so I jumped around majors and I landed in geography because unfortunately it was the only thing I could do to graduate. And that was just, sometimes in college it's hard to kind of find those boundaries and set your course. But I made it through, and the Navy, when I went to select for a career, I put meteorology as kind of oh, that sounded okay, and they picked me up for it, even though my degree was in geography and not even though there's a lot of weather in geography, our career typically requires much more of like a physics background or a straight atmospheric science background. So I kind of came in convoluted. So I think maybe my perspective is in the Navy, there's a lot of opportunity because there's a lot more flexibility. I came in with a degree in geography and not very good grades, and 12 years later, they gave me the chance to get a Ph.D. So I think, there's the academic part of it, but I think more so is just networking and exposure, whether it's joining the AMS chapter or internships. I think Aidan and Lexi may have a little bit more to add because I didn't do a kind of a traditional path to operational meteorology. Mine was a little more unique, but I will say that's one great thing about the Navy is there's a lot of opportunities that you didn't think you had access to beforehand.
Lexi, you want to jump in?
Sure, I'd love to jump in. So me, myself, as a student, I've gotten a little experience with operational meteorology with volunteering. I've gotten some internships that has helped in that perspective area. But for those of us who actually have never gotten that kind of experience, that transition from university to early career can be really, really difficult. And I think the main question is like, how would you, or what kind of advice would you give to those students that are struggling with that transition, or that are thinking about that and wondering, oh gosh, is this really going to be much more difficult than college? Or what if I didn't learn too much in this specific area, which leads into the imposter syndrome? So if there's like any advice that you could give to students who want to join operational meteorology, what could you say about that?
I didn't know if Aidan was going to speak. I didn't want to jump in, but you know what I've learned from the short time that I've been with Weather Service, and I was happy to hear Lexi talk about. It can be extremely difficult. One of the biggest challenge of our operational meteorologists is shift work. You know, the rapid changing shift, no stability in your personal life, inability to rest because of those rapidly changing shifts. And so I think as a student pursuing that, I would encourage you to do what Lexi and it sounds like Aiden has done as well. Try to shadow, try to get in on, complete some internships or volunteer work so that you can see the reality of operational life. And then if you still can pursue that path, one of the things I try to talk with the meteorologist here at Weather Service is and I want everyone to know that's one thing that Weather Service I'm working on and being here at Weather Service. How can we make some changes to how shift work is done with so it will have less impact on not only psychological but physiological work life balance. But you have to, if you're struggling with practicing good self-care and life balance now, you're probably going to struggle as you enter into the demands of being in operations. And so, you know, it's difficult, to get a steady sleep cycle. It's difficult to exercise. It's difficult to eat well. And so I've had people ask, where should I start? I always say the low hanging fruit. Do what is easy to do first and then work on the other things. So make sure you understand sleep hygiene. Make sure you know how to, meal prep so you're getting, you're taking fuel in to keep your brain and body going. And then if you're young and if you're dating, if you're getting ready to get married, make sure your family knows the reality and the sacrifice that they'll have to make along with you, and make sure that you're on the same page because this can be very disruptive to family life as well. And sometimes we think we understand, but until we're in it, we don't fully feel the impact. So definitely, volunteer, internships, shadow, and then start practicing self-care now. Start being honest about the areas that are important to you and what small changes that you can make that will have a significant impact for any of those areas that I mentioned in your life.
Thank you
Yeah, I'd
so
like
much.
to jump in. I think, sorry, Lexi, go ahead.
I was just saying thank you so much for that. And then I'll introduce another question after you speak.
Okay, sorry. One thing I'd like to add, so, I think a key part of this is leadership, is having leadership in communities and in workplaces and in commands who take it seriously. And obviously that's kind of, you don't know what type of leader you're going to have, but everybody can be a leader, right? Just because you're not in charge of, your workplace or your command doesn't mean you don't have a role to play. You can lead, you can lead your colleagues, you can lead yourself, you can lead your subordinates, you can also lead superiors by asking questions, by offering solutions. I know at our command at Fleet Weather Center, our commanding officer really stresses the four different types of fitness, mental fitness, physical fitness, emotional fitness, and spiritual fitness. And he talks to everybody about that for every new check-in, to take all four of those seriously, because you need all four of them. And one of the ones that makes some people feel uncomfortable is spiritual fitness, because not everybody is religious. But being spiritual doesn't necessarily mean being religious. It can mean many different things. And it's about, connecting yourself with the bigger picture. And I think part of managing the self-care is being able to balance all four of those. So, being mentally fit, so improving yourself through education, being the best that you can be in that world, physical fitness, emotional fitness, and investing in that. So investing time with your family, investing time with friendships, which is something that I didn't do years ago. I didn't take friendships seriously, and now it's really important, because you need people you can talk to. You need peers that you can talk to. And I think if you neglect any one of those, your life won't necessarily be balanced. You can work out all you want and be extremely physically fit, but if you don't have your mind straight, your family life straight, and your spiritual side straight, again, not necessarily religious, but just where you fit in the bigger picture of whatever it is matters to you, something's going to fall. And so I think it's important for people to take accountability personally for that, but also encourage peers and ask the right questions of their leaders to ask for that support.
Thank you so much. My next question is actually going to be aimed towards Aidan, and it was asked by a student that couldn't be here today. And this is for you, Aidan. So for students interested in pathways positions in operational meteorology, how do you manage your time between work and school? And how do you deal with potentially becoming overworked or burned out?
Yeah, so I realized during my introduction I was so concerned with introducing the board that I think I forgot to fully finish introducing myself. I am a Pathways Intern at the National Hurricane Center in Miami within the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch. I have been in that role since May of 2020, so I came on board during COVID, which of course is a whole other topic of discussion. But to get to the first part of that question about time management, especially during COVID and working remote primarily for most of my internship, time management was something that I almost had to approach on like a day-to-day basis. Like, how much can I get done on Tuesday? And then when I reach my limit, it's sort of in flux. Maybe I could shift some other tasks to later in the week. And I'd say the most important thing with regards to time management is knowing your limits. And when you reach your limit, even if you push yourself to do more work, it's not going to be of the quality that you would otherwise produce. So that's the most important thing about that. And then the other thing is, like, yes, you do have like a part-time job in addition to your school responsibility. And it's important to communicate with your supervisors, your mentors, even with your friends in an informal context, just to make sure you keep talking and you don't internalize any of the stresses that you're having. I mean, one of the biggest things that we've already highlighted through this discussion today is, communication and being open and honest with one another, and not trying to bear your own burdens all by yourself. And now, to the second part, which is closely related, how do you deal with potentially becoming overworked? I would say that, again, this plays into the same thing. Know your boundary, know your limits, take the annual leave that you accrue if you need it. So, in my case, like pretty much during the last 3 weeks of the semester, which is riddled with finals and projects, I always make sure I take my annual leave then. And so then I essentially just focus on school, because, at this point in my career, at least, I got to get my degree. So the academics are the most important, essentially your priority number one. And you should make sure that you work with your supervisor and make sure that they understand that. I'm lucky to have a great team of mentors and supervisors who do understand that and even advocate that, I would argue, more than myself. So, maintaining again, just that communication is superbly important, and knowing your own limits and being able to act upon any stressors that you encounter.
I'd like to jump in and answer another question from the list that we have. So this one kind of goes back to shift work, because I think it's important we talk about that with respect to what we actually do. Shift work is one of the most mentally and physically taxing aspects of a career in operational government meteorology. Do you have any advice for maintaining a work-life balance critical for overall health, including mental health? Absolutely. Shift work is extremely difficult because it's hard to get a routine when nobody else is on that shift work schedule, especially if you have families. So I think for me, the most important thing that I learned was to establish a routine, a new routine of whatever it was that you could, so that you could prioritize your emotional health, your mental health, and your physical health, and then protecting that routine, which can mean, balancing expectations of other people, learning to say no if you can't meet an obligation. That one's really hard, and that's both inside and outside of the workplace. If you're outside of your shift work schedule, but you're asked to come in and do more work because it's important, learning to say no if it intrudes on your personal time, because you need that personal time to balance. And that's not always easy to do when you're new to a workplace, or you're, a junior service member. It's really hard to say no to superiors. But sometimes you have to, but obviously there's a way to do it that, you can explain why, and, ask your colleagues, how they're balancing their life, and, kind of help encourage other people to think think critically about, are they investing time in themselves? Because there's obviously an urge when you're young, you want to be a hot runner, and you want to, take on a lot of work so that you can, be the go-to person wherever you work. But there's a cost to that. One thing I've told people around me is, you don't have to be a hero every day. It's important to establish consistency and balance in your life, because if you can't do that, you won't ever get to be a hero. So you've got to start with balance and consistency first.
Were there other questions that people have or that we need to answer? So Andrew made an interesting statement. I think he's the last person in the chat box. I'm going to go down to his question and then go back to some of the things that he shared in the chat box. But how is this event shared for future reference? He said a lot of people, or those that are in his circle, didn't know about this event.
Yeah, so thank you, Andrew, for this comment. So we did put it out on social media this week, but I think the unfortunate timing of the potential shutdown sort of, I guess, just gave it maybe a little bit of a muted reaction across all of our channels. I am happy to say that this is being recorded, and we will make this recording available for on-demand viewing on the AMS website for those of you who are members of the AMS. And also that, as we did mention, this is the first in a series of webinars, so hopefully we can market the next ones maybe a little bit more widely. I do think it would be helpful to do that, because again, we value all of these different perspectives that the four of us up here maybe potentially can't bring to the table. So thank you, Andrew.
And this will be posted on YouTube again, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
So I just want to, Andrew commented, he sees the struggles of others that he's working with. and maybe there's some obvious self-medication. And I always get the question, what do I do if I know someone is struggling with, whether it's substance misuse or abuse or a mental health challenge? What should I do? How can I help? And I think sometimes we underestimate the power of a question or a kind, respectful statement. And so asking, reaching out and saying, how are you doing? Or I've noticed, or just saying, I'm here to help, or by the way, here's a great resource. And sometimes we will choose the path of silence, or because we're afraid of how the person will respond or how we might be received. And sometimes that's all they're waiting for, is for someone to notice or communicate or give them throw them a lifeline. So I always say there's always a respectful way of communicating, but it's our obligation, if we see it, if we're not comfortable making a statement, ask a question. We can't be responsible for how they receive it or their response, but we are responsible for noticing and maybe not taking action. So I would encourage you, if you suspect or if you're seeing that, either ask a question or offer a lifeline through simple statements to let them know that they're not alone, and that there's someone willing to help or be there for them.
Yeah, and that's a great point as we near the end of the event. So I just want to open up the floor for any final thoughts, or if anyone has any last minute questions or comments in the chat. Gordon, thank you for your feedback as well. But I don't know, Commander Jones, Gardner, or Lexi, have any final comments?
I think I'll just add that it's hard to say that we should be responsible for other people, but I think realizing that, kind of to follow on what Valarie talked about, we have to take accountability for the people around us and ask the questions and be there to support the people around us. And I know that's not easy. It can be awkward sometimes. It can be difficult to overcome your own self-doubt, but a lot can be achieved just by asking the right questions and letting people know that you care. And even if you can't do anything about it yourself, just asking the question and pointing someone in the right direction can make the difference.
Thank you. Lexi, any final thoughts?
Just wanted to say thank you. This definitely helps, especially from a student perspective, of what to see and what we'll be looking forward to as operational meteorologists in the future, and our resources that are available, and how everything's evolving, especially with your position now, Valarie, like since you just came in 2020. And it's really good to see that mental health is becoming more of a norm and not a stigma type. So
I appreciated that. And I put my email address in the chat box. So if you have any additional questions or want to reach out, feel free to do so. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you to our panelists, Lieutenant Commander Jones and Lieutenant Commander Gardner, and as well as Lexi. It was great to have you here as well. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll post the recording hopefully later next week. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.